They never take what you give willingly. They take what you spill. Emotion thieves survive in the small cracks between your reactions, in the moments when your control falters and something raw escapes. They don't hunt for your love or your trust. They hunt for your pulse, the living current behind every word you speak. They study the tremor in your voice, the hesitation before your silence, the way your eyes shift when you try to hide pain. To them, emotion is not intimacy, it's energy. Every sigh, every spark of anger, every tremor of guilt is a signal they can convert into power. You think you are expressing yourself, but in their world, expression is extraction. The more you feel, the more they feed. The more you try to explain, the more they tighten the net. Their strength is built on your reaction, not your resistance. They don't need to control your body. They only need to predict your heart. That's why they test you with quiet provocations, a delayed reply, a cutting word disguised as a joke, a sudden withdrawal after affection. They observe how you bleed emotion into the air, how your mind rushes to fill the silence with apology or justification. Each time you react, you surrender a piece of your internal peace. They collect it quietly, like hunters gathering drops of dew before dawn. And when you're empty, when you can no longer tell where your feelings end and their influence begins, they step back, calm, satisfied, untouched. You are left in the echo of your own overreaction, wondering why it feels like they always win without fighting. The truth is simple and cruel. They never needed to fight. They only needed to make you feel. Because feeling is the bridge that carries your energy straight into their hands. And in that transfer, unseen but absolute, you become both the source and the sacrifice. They survive on what others waste, the invisible energy that slips from unguarded hearts. Every time you defend yourself, every time you try to prove your worth, you offer them another serving of what they crave most. Emotional response. They feed not on your pain itself, but on the movement it creates within you. The rush of blood, the tightening in your chest, the spark that proves they still hold space in your mind. They are masters of the invisible exchange, knowing that control doesn't come from force, but from rhythm. They set the tempo, and you dance, unaware that every reaction feeds the rhythm they wrote for you. When you argue, they listen not to your words but to your tone. When you retreat, they note your silence. Every action becomes a map of your emotional landscape, and soon they know the terrain better than you do. This is their art, turning empathy into leverage, curiosity into exposure, and care into currency. They don't want your understanding, they want your instability. Because as long as you are reacting, you are not observing. As long as you are feeling, you are not choosing. They make you believe that responding is strength, that caring is proof of your humanity. But to them, it's a signal that their grip still works. Their calmness, their quiet smirk, the way they stand untouched while you unravel. It's not indifference, it's feeding. You feel their absence as punishment, but for them, it's preservation. They withdraw not because they're done, but because you've given enough for now. And while you sit replaying the moment, trying to understand what you did wrong, they're already planning the next harvest. The pattern continues until you mistake emotional exhaustion for love and confusion for connection. By the time you see it, you're already too deep because you've taught them exactly how to reach you. They study the pulse of your reactions like a code that unlocks your spirit. Each word you throw in defense becomes a thread they pull tighter. Each attempt to reason becomes a doorway they step through. Over time, you start mistaking their curiosity for care, their intensity for depth. But their connection is never built on understanding. It's built on extraction. They draw from you until your emotions no longer belong to you. Your anger becomes their validation. Your sadness becomes their proof of control. You begin to see how every conversation turns into a cycle of provocation and regret, a silent game where your feelings are the currency that keeps it alive. They don't need to overpower you. They only need to invite you into a reaction strong enough to consume your clarity. And when they sense your exhaustion, they offer calm, not as kindness, but as contrast, to make you crave the peace that only they seem able to give. That's the cruel symmetry. They injure you just enough to make their presence feel like medicine. Slowly, your nervous system starts to orbit them. You anticipate their moods before your own, measure your peace against their silence, and call this awareness love. But what you're really doing is feeding them, not with affection, but with the proof that they matter more than your inner stillness. This is how control hides in plain sight, not through domination, but through dependence disguised as emotional intimacy. You stop asking, "Why do they do this?" and start asking, "What's wrong with me?" That's when the harvest is complete. When your self-doubt becomes their safety, when your reactions become their reward. You begin to realize that the greatest theft doesn't happen when someone takes from your hands. It happens when they make you offer what should have never left your heart. They learn you first by reflection, not through words, but through imitation so precise that it feels like recognition. They watch the way you speak, the rhythm of your emotions, the stories you tell about yourself. And then, piece by piece, they build a version of you that feels familiar, safe, and magnetic. When they mirror your energy, it feels like home. You think you've found someone who finally understands the parts of you others overlook. But this understanding is not empathy, it is strategy. Their reflection is a study, not a bond. Every smile, every nod, every pause in their gaze is a data point gathered for later use. They are not connecting, they are calibrating. The illusion begins when you start to feel seen, when their attention becomes a spotlight that makes your emotions glow. You lower your guard because they seem to echo your soul, because they speak your language without asking you to translate it. Yet, what feels like harmony is a rehearsal for control. They craft their reflection to be exactly what you crave: attentive, kind, wounded in the same places you are. In that perfect symmetry, you lose sight of where you end and they begin. You start trusting the mirror more than your own reflection. They watch this carefully, because your surrender is the real reward. Once you're convinced that their empathy is genuine, they begin to test how deeply your emotions respond to the image they've built. They shift tone, withdraw warmth, change rhythm, and observe your reaction like scientists studying the effects of light on growth. The goal is not affection. It's access. Once they know which emotional strings control your equilibrium, they can make you question your perception every time their reflection changes. You'll blame yourself for the difference, thinking you've broken something beautiful, never realizing that beauty was only bait. The brilliance of their design lies in subtle distortion. Once you're trapped inside their mirror, they begin to twist it slowly, turning your own emotions against you. What was once validation becomes confusion. What once felt like closeness becomes tension. You start noticing small changes. Their eyes don't meet yours as often. Their voice carries a colder tone. Their warmth becomes conditional. And when you ask what's wrong, they mirror your concern with quiet detachment, making you feel dramatic for even noticing. This is how they reshape reality, by controlling your sense of reflection. They make you question whether your instincts are exaggerating, whether your perception has become flawed. Soon, your mind starts working for them, analyzing every silence, every pause, every shift in tone, as if solving them could restore the person you thought you knew. They don't need to defend themselves. They simply let your emotions defend them for them. You begin apologizing for feelings they intentionally provoked. You start censoring your truth to preserve their illusion of peace. And in this slow erosion, they feed. Because your emotional instability is not their accident, it's their harvest. They take the reactions you can't suppress and use them as evidence of your fragility. The more unbalanced you become, the more power they appear to have. They convince you that your emotions are the problem, that your overthinking, your sensitivity, your yearning for clarity are signs of weakness. But the weakness isn't in feeling. It's in believing that reflection equals truth. What you see in their mirror was never meant to reflect you. It was meant to distort you until you forget your shape. When they finally withdraw, you chase their approval like sunlight, unaware that they've taught you to see yourself only through their eyes. And that's when they win, not through control, but through confusion so convincing it feels like love. At first, you try to fight back by becoming calmer, quieter, more deliberate, thinking that self-control will shield you. But in their mirror, even silence becomes a signal. They interpret your restraint as distance, your detachment as defiance, and your stillness as proof that you care enough to hold back. They read you like a script they wrote themselves. Every time you adapt, they adapt faster. When you speak with reason, they speak with emotion. When you reach for logic, they reach for vulnerability. And soon, you find yourself trapped in a theater where every scene is rewritten to suit their narrative. They have learned the rhythm of your empathy, when to feign hurt, when to withdraw, when to offer just enough warmth to reignite your hope. You start confusing their unpredictability with depth, mistaking the chaos for chemistry. They don't want resolution, because resolution ends the supply. What they crave is the continuous loop of reaction, guilt, and reconciliation, the rhythm of emotional dependency. The moment you begin to doubt them, they become gentle again, mirroring the softness that made you trust them in the first place. You tell yourself this must be the real them, that the darkness was only a misunderstanding. But the kindness is only a tool, a reset button designed to make you forget the lesson you almost learned. Their strength lies in repetition, not in cruelty, but in familiarity. The longer you stay, the more you start performing for the mirror, trying to win back the version of yourself they first reflected. And that is the final illusion. Believing that if you just love better, understand deeper, or stay calmer, the reflection will become real again. But the truth is colder. The mirror never loved you. It only learned you. And once it has taken enough, it will shatter, leaving you surrounded by pieces that all look like you, yet none of them truly are. In every human connection, there is an unspoken currency, and it is not love, it is attention. The moment you give it, the exchange begins. For most people, attention is a form of care, a way to see and be seen. But for those who thrive on emotional extraction, attention is the marketplace where power is traded in silence. They understand its scarcity better than you ever could, and that is why they control it like a resource, giving a little, withholding more, always ensuring you stay hungry enough to keep reaching. Their brilliance lies in rhythm, not chaos. They disappear not because they are busy, but because absence multiplies their value. The less they respond, the more your mind spins. You start replaying conversations, searching for clues, turning fragments into stories that justify their silence. And with each thought, you give them more of what they crave: focus, energy, life. They don't need to chase. They only need to provoke curiosity and then retreat. You do the rest. You write their narrative in your head, crafting explanations that make them seem deeper than they are, kinder than they have been, more wounded than they ever confessed. This is the silent trade, your attention for their illusion. And the more you invest, the harder it becomes to walk away, because every unanswered question feels like debt. You start measuring your worth by their replies, your peace by their presence. The balance shifts without you noticing. They become the center of your emotional economy, and you become the currency that keeps it alive. The tragedy is that you think you're seeking closure, but what you're really doing is funding their control. Attention is the oxygen of manipulation, the quiet force that sustains their illusion of importance. They don't have to steal it. They just have to make you offer it freely. The more you pay attention, the poorer you become. It sounds cruel, but it's the quiet arithmetic of emotional economics. Each glance, each message, each attempt to be understood drains something from within you, something invisible but essential. They know this. That is why they engineer moments of uncertainty, not to hurt you, but to keep you spending. Every delayed reply, every vague statement, every unpredictable shift in tone is an invitation to invest a little more of yourself. You start analyzing their silence as if it were language, translating absence into meaning, convincing yourself that the emptiness between interactions must hold some hidden truth. But the truth is simpler. They've made your mind their home. You live in reaction to them now, revolving around the mystery they created. They never have to chase your attention. You deliver it to them wrapped in your confusion. The system works because you believe attention equals care, that if you just give more, understand more, endure longer, you will eventually earn balance. But balance is not what they want. They want the pursuit. The chase keeps you feeding them, not with admiration, but with your need to make sense of them. They thrive in that fog, the space where your logic bends under emotion, where your self-awareness turns into obsession. Each unanswered question feels like an open loop in your mind, one you feel compelled to close. But closure doesn't come. It's replaced by more uncertainty, more waiting, more emotional expense. They offer just enough response to keep you from walking away. Breadcrumbs of attention designed to sustain hope. You don't realize that you've become a subscriber to their silence, paying in thought, time, and rest. And when exhaustion finally comes, they vanish, leaving you with a void that still belongs to them. That void is their masterpiece, the proof that they don't need to stay to keep you orbiting their absence. There comes a point when you realize that your thoughts no longer belong to you. They orbit someone else, a person who might not even be thinking about you at all. That realization is brutal, because attention feels voluntary until you see how it's been redirected without your consent. They trained you to equate their validation with peace, their recognition with worth. Every time they pulled away, they planted scarcity in your heart, and scarcity is the most powerful motivator of all. You learned to chase what you once received freely, to pour energy into earning what was never yours to keep. That is the quiet genius of their design. They don't steal your time or your affection outright. They convince you to spend it willingly. The economy works because it's invisible. You become your own collector, offering thoughts, emotions, and presence in exchange for the illusion of being seen. You mistake exhaustion for devotion, obsession for love, and emptiness for depth. They don't need to demand attention anymore. Your mind does it for them. replaying moments, imagining explanations, writing endless stories in their absence. This is how control survives without contact, through memory. Even silence becomes a form of engagement when it carries their shape. The cruelest part is that when you finally begin to pull away, you feel guilty. You've been conditioned to see your detachment as betrayal, your peace as coldness. But that guilt is the last thread tying you to their power. Once you understand that attention is the only resource they ever wanted, detachment becomes rebellion. You reclaim yourself not by confronting them, but by starving the connection that no longer feeds you. They wither when unseen. They vanish when unacknowledged. Because the empire they built inside your head cannot survive the one thing they cannot manipulate, your silence. Dependence is not built overnight. It is crafted like architecture, one emotional brick at a time. It begins with small exchanges of comfort, little gestures that feel like safety. They study your needs and construct a version of themselves that fits perfectly within them. You don't see the design at first, you just feel understood. That sense of understanding becomes a foundation, a place where your defenses begin to soften. Then, quietly, they start rearranging your emotional furniture, altering your sense of balance, shifting your priorities, teaching you that their presence equals calm and their absence equals disarray. Every kind word, every reassurance, every shared vulnerability is placed with precision, like scaffolding around your heart. They never ask you to depend on them. They simply make it feel natural. Soon, your emotions start seeking them automatically, the way light seeks a window. When something good happens, you want to tell them first. When something bad happens, you need their validation to feel grounded. That is how they anchor themselves inside you, not through dominance, but through necessity. You begin to define your reality through their reactions. If they're warm, you feel safe. If they're distant, you feel wrong. Your emotions become calibrated to their approval, and slowly, the architecture closes in. It looks like intimacy, but it's infrastructure, a network of invisible strings connecting your joy, your guilt, and your peace back to them. The more they give, the more they own. Each emotional debt they create ensures that even when they hurt you, you can't walk away without feeling like you're dismantling your own stability. That's the genius of dependence. You don't realize it's a cage until the door closes behind you. And by then, leaving feels like self-destruction. Once the structure is set, they begin to decorate it with emotion, guilt for the walls, hope for the ceiling, and fear for the floor. Each feeling is placed where it keeps you standing still. They make you believe that your loyalty is proof of love, that your endurance is strength, that your silence is peace. You start carrying the weight of both your emotions and theirs, trying to maintain a balance that was designed to fail. When they withdraw, it feels like oxygen leaving the room. When they return, it feels like sunlight breaking through after endless rain. That rhythm becomes your heartbeat. You begin to mistake anxiety for attachment because it's the only state where you feel alive in their presence. They understand this better than you do. That pain, when tied to affection, becomes a powerful leash. Every small act of kindness after neglect feels monumental, like a miracle you must earn again. They keep you in that cycle. Deprivation followed by reward, doubt followed by reassurance. It's not random, it's reinforcement. Your emotions are trained like an animal responding to signals. You learn to read every nuance of their mood, anticipating their reactions before your own. You think this is empathy, but it's survival. You're not loving them. You're maintaining stability inside the house they built around your nervous system. They've turned your emotional intelligence into self-policing. You monitor yourself to avoid punishment, to secure another glimpse of warmth. That is how dependence matures. When love starts to feel like a transaction, and peace becomes something you have to perform to deserve. It's not chains that hold you, but meaning, the belief that all of this must be happening for a reason, that breaking away would destroy something sacred. But what's sacred to you is strategic to them. They don't want your freedom, only your focus. Because as long as your emotions orbit them, they remain the architect, and you remain the foundation. The most dangerous part of this design is that you start believing it was built by love. You convince yourself that their control is care, that their possessiveness is protection, that the discomfort you feel is proof of depth. That's how the illusion survives, by convincing you that freedom would mean loss. They've taught you to crave their validation more than your own peace, to measure your worth by how close or distant they appear. And when they pull away, you don't see manipulation. You see failure in yourself. You begin to chase them not out of desire, but out of fear. Fear of being unloved, unseen, forgotten. That fear cements the walls they built. You start negotiating with your own dignity, offering smaller and smaller pieces of yourself to restore the equilibrium that keeps collapsing. You tell yourself this time will be different, that you'll communicate better, understand more, love harder. But the structure never changes, only you do. You shrink to fit the space they designed for you, a place where your needs echo but are never answered. And even as exhaustion spreads through you, a part of you still defends them, because dependence disguises itself as devotion. It whispers that leaving would make you cruel, that detachment would make you heartless. But the truth is quieter and far more painful. They never wanted love, only leverage. They don't need to chain your body when they already own your emotions. The power was never in what they gave you, but in what they made you believe you couldn't live without. When you finally see that, when the illusion cracks and the silence inside you becomes louder than their voice, you realize the cage was never locked. You were holding the key the whole time. You just forgot you had the right to use it. Every act of manipulation begins as a ritual, not a sudden explosion, but a carefully choreographed ceremony where emotion becomes currency and reaction becomes tribute. The manipulator does not steal by force, they summon. They provoke, observe, and record your emotional pulse until they can predict it with precision. Every sigh, every tear, every defensive word becomes part of a pattern they can control. They learn when to push and when to withhold, when to turn silent, so that your fear of losing them speaks louder than any insult could. Soon, it's not about what they say, it's about what you do next. You become the performer in their theater, repeating the same emotional gestures over and over, believing they come from love, when in truth, their response is scripted by their absence or cruelty. This is the ritual, the fight, the apology, the relief, the quiet, the next provocation. Round after round, emotion becomes the altar on which you sacrifice reason. They don't feed on your affection. They feed on the intensity of it, the trembling voice, the shaking hands, the desperate text you regret sending but can't stop yourself from writing. And when they retreat, you feel the void like withdrawal, mistaking the silence for peace when it's only the pause before the next round. That's how the ritual sustains itself, through your need to end it, not theirs. The more you try to fix it, the tighter it binds you. Each reaction confirms your devotion, and each silence from them reinforces their power. It's not cruelty that keeps the ritual alive, but your hope that one day, your reaction will finally be enough to change them. But it never will. Because the moment they no longer control your response, the ritual dies, and with it, their hold over you. The ritual continues because it feels familiar, not because it feels right. You begin to confuse emotional turbulence with connection, mistaking the storm for passion and the silence for stability. The mind learns to crave what hurts it because chaos at least feels alive. And this is what the emotional predator understands better than you. That predictability is the purest form of control. They don't need to imprison you. They only need to teach you how to react. Every argument is rehearsed in their mind before it begins. Every silence calculated to pull you into confession or guilt. They understand that human beings are pattern-seeking creatures, desperate to find meaning even in cruelty. So they turn your empathy into their weapon. They hurt you just enough to awaken your need to fix, then soothe you just enough to keep you hoping. The result is a perfect emotional algorithm, a self-sustaining loop of stimulus and response, where your reactions feed their sense of power. And the more you resist, the more you participate, because resistance still means attention, and attention is the one thing they can't generate on their own. They are hollow until you react. That's why they return again and again, not because they love you, but because your emotions validate their existence. You have become their mirror, reflecting back the fragments they cannot find within themselves. And even when you begin to see through the act, even when you know exactly what they are doing, the ritual tempts you to answer one last message, to clarify one last misunderstanding, to prove you're calm by engaging once more. But that's how it traps you, not through force, but through familiarity. You become conditioned to offer the very thing they need, your reaction. And every time you do, they feed again, quietly, efficiently, endlessly. There comes a moment when you begin to see the pattern not as chaos, but as choreography. Every provocation, every withdrawal, every silence was never random. It was ritual. And you, unknowingly, were the one keeping it alive. The emotional thief does not survive on power alone. They depend on the energy you give through your reactions. Without that fuel, their identity begins to fracture. The illusion of dominance collapses when the supply of emotion stops flowing. But withdrawal is not easy. It feels like tearing a cord that connects your mind to theirs. Your instinct will scream to respond, to explain, to have the final word. But that's the last illusion. That closure comes from reaction. It never does. Closure is born in silence, in reclaiming the space where their voice used to echo. When you stop reacting, the ritual begins to crumble. The manipulator, starved of attention, grows restless, desperate. They will test your silence with guilt, with pity, with sudden affection, anything to restart the ritual. But every moment you hold your ground, the power shifts back to you. Because stillness is not weakness. It is starvation to those who feed on chaos. The absence of reaction becomes the loudest refusal, the one they cannot argue with or twist into their favor. Eventually, they retreat, seeking another source to drain, another heart to ignite and consume. And though you will feel the void they leave, it will not be loss. It will be cleansing. The ritual dies in the absence of your energy, and what remains is not emptiness, but space, the kind of silence that belongs to you alone. In that quiet, you rediscover what was stolen, not just peace, but power. The power to feel without feeding another's hunger. The power to exist without explaining your emotions. The power to no longer be the offering in someone else's ritual. There is an art to silence, a discipline so sharp it feels like starvation. When you stop reacting, you are not just withholding words. You are cutting off the invisible supply that once kept them powerful. The emotional predator thrives on your energy, your outrage, your confusion, your need to be understood. Every reply you send, every explanation you offer, every tremor in your voice becomes nourishment for their ego. But when you begin to master stillness, their world starts to starve. They no longer know where to press to make you bleed emotion. They send messages designed to reopen wounds, craft scenarios to draw out your empathy, but you give them nothing, not anger, not sorrow, not curiosity. To them, your silence is violence, because it breaks the pattern they depend on to feel alive. The manipulator feeds on your reactions like a parasite clinging to warmth, and when you turn cold, they begin to decay. But the art of starvation is not about revenge, it's about recovery. It's about understanding that your energy is not a gift, it's currency, and not everyone deserves to spend it. You learn that restraint is not weakness but dominance disguised as calm. You stop fighting for closure and start starving the narrative that kept you trapped. The first days feel unbearable, like withdrawal from an addiction. Your mind will whisper, reach out, fix it, explain yourself. But every time you resist, you reclaim a fragment of yourself that was once traded for validation. Over time, silence becomes a language stronger than any defense, a shield forged in discipline. It teaches you that emotional control is not suppression, it's protection. The thieves cannot steal what you refuse to display. They cannot twist what you never reveal. They cannot feed where there is no reaction. This is the turning point, when you stop being the hunted and become the observer, when the hunger shifts from you to them, and they finally face the emptiness they once buried inside you. When you stop reacting, something unsettling happens, not just to them, but to you. The silence you create begins to echo, and in that echo, you meet the parts of yourself you abandoned to keep the ritual alive. At first, it feels like deprivation, like you're denying yourself closure or compassion. But in truth, you're detoxing from a poisoned connection. The manipulator depends on the rhythm of reaction, conflict, reconciliation, tension, relief, a cycle that feeds them certainty and feeds you exhaustion. When you stop responding, that rhythm dies, and with it, their illusion of control. But the art of starvation is not passive. It is a deliberate act of psychological rebellion. It means refusing to give them the one thing they crave, proof that they still matter in your emotional world. You become unreadable, unpredictable, unprofitable to their hunger. They send hooks wrapped in nostalgia, guilt, or sudden affection, but you stay still. You stop explaining yourself, stop defending your intentions, stop trying to prove your worth to someone who only values your reaction. Every moment of silence carves distance. Every unanswered word turns their need back upon itself. You begin to see their gestures for what they are, not affection, but fishing lines cast into your mind, hoping for movement. And as you withhold response, their confidence cracks. The one who once dictated your mood now drowns in uncertainty. You are no longer the one being read. You are the one observing. The balance shifts quietly, but absolutely. This is what they fear most, your emotional absence. Because once you stop feeding them, they are left alone with the emptiness they spent their life escaping. And in that silence, they finally meet themselves, not the mask they built, not the persona you believed in, but the hollow truth of someone who only existed through reaction. That is the starvation they cannot survive. In the end, Starvation is not about denial, it is about release. The act of withholding reaction is not a punishment you give to them. It's the freedom you return to yourself. You begin to see how much of your life revolved around feeding others with emotion. Anger disguised as justice, sorrow mistaken for connection, explanation offered as love. Every reaction was a trade, every outburst an offering, every apology a small surrender. But when you finally learn to hold your silence without guilt, you step outside the market where your emotions were currency. The manipulators can no longer bargain with your empathy or auction your attention. They stand before you, powerless not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting entirely. You realize that they were never addicted to you. They were addicted to the feeling of being felt. And when you withdraw that feeling, they face the void they've always run from. The art of starvation, then, becomes the art of clarity. You no longer need to prove your strength through noise. You no longer need to answer to chaos disguised as care. You exist beyond the reach of their hunger. In that quiet, a strange kind of power blooms, not loud, not proud, but rooted in knowing that your energy is yours alone. You begin to choose when to feel, when to speak, when to stay still. And for the first time, your emotions belong entirely to you, not as reactions, but as choices. That is what breaks the chain, the understanding that peace is not found in being heard, but in no longer needing to explain. The emotional thieves fade not through confrontation, but through your absence. They cannot steal what no longer reaches toward them. Silence becomes your sovereignty. Detachment becomes your defense. And in that stillness, you are no longer the source of their power. You are its end.